Let's get some analysis with respected budget watcher Chris Richardson, partner at Deloitte Access Economics. Chris, what's your overall take on where the budget wraps up 2021?
Look, lots of good news on the economy flowing all through today's document, ending up in the strength of the economy itself, ending up in wages, ending up in jobs, but not ending up in the budget. The economy got better, but the budget, those deficits, did not.
Yeah, more than 100 billion additional revenue since May, but that's all going out the door. It's all being spent.
Yeah, it is, right? And some of it had to be spent. Some of it's already been spent. You know, about a quarter of that was, for example, fighting Delta. That cost the feds directly, and they gave money to the states. And they, another quarter of it, for example, we've long since promised the nation to fund disability services, but we were slipping behind there, so they put some extra money in. There are, you mentioned, up to $16 billion for election promises. We don't quite know where all of the $100 billion has gone, but yeah, the economy delivered a big dividend to the budget, and it all went again.
So explain to us that 100 billion expenditure and where we have a shortfall, where we don't know, where there's not clarity on what's being spent, because we know there's about just under 30 billion for the NDIS, similar amount for COVID supports, big aged care expenditure as well. Where's the gap?
So the announcement today was that over the next 4 years, spending was going to be $104 billion, more than had been expected back in May. There's a lovely little table, page 73, I hate myself for knowing, setting that out. Right? But at the bottom of that table, right, you know, to reach the total of $104 billion, there was an other variations, over $34 billion. Basically, a third of the increase in spending is other. Now, we live in complicated times. There are all sorts of things happening left, right and centre. But, you know, you do kind of want a bit more to know about it. So you and I can talk about, you know, the cost of fighting Delta. We can talk about NDIS.
Well, I asked Josh Frydenberg about that that 30 billion, and he listed various things like infrastructure, apprenticeships, various other measures. Did that not detail the...
No, because that's talking about new policies, and that is covered off, and I think broadly I can see where all that money is. This is essentially the cost of existing policies, and sometimes it's more expensive. You know, NDIS, for example, is a big thing, but it would be nice to have a bit more detail there. We always knew, right? COVID was costing a fortune. I don't object to that. For me as a budget watcher, if you've got to use our budget, and we entered this with a stronger budget than pretty much most other nations around the world, and we used that as a shield, and that's gone really well, I don't worry about that. I do worry about where the budget goes ongoing, not because of the COVID costs, but because of the everything else costs. You know, defence is going to be more expensive. Social spending, we're seeing it in the NDIS, and the cost of running Australia has gone up. That's tricky, that's expensive, we need that conversation.
Let's look at a few specific things. The employment rate, forecast to be down to 4.5% halfway through next year. Today, in a bit of a headline stealer, the ABS numbers for November, it had the unemployment rate down to 4.6%. 366,000 jobs created in November, including 128,000 full-time jobs. That's extraordinary, isn't it, that rebound?
It is stunning. Australia can be proud. We tend to, you know, get lost and notice mostly what's happening here and not in the rest of the world. Australia's done very well against COVID. We've done very well until now in terms of our health, which has helped us do very well in terms of our economy. Twice we have fought our way back. You know, COVID got us into lockdown initially. We fought back, got us into lockdown again with Delta. We're fighting back beautifully. Those are stunning numbers. Remember today that this document, this budget update, made the only assumption that the government could sensibly make, that we stay ahead of COVID. But as we all know, there's a risk, right? You know, even with the brilliance of vaccines and the additional protection we'll get from boosters, you know, that's... As a health measure, sure. As an economic measure, get out and get that booster. We're not yet entirely sure that COVID is done with us.
And we have a lot of things to be optimistic about in terms of that COVID story, with suggestions from experts, reputable epidemiologists and infectious diseases experts who indicate it is a milder form, and also breakthroughs not just in vaccines but antiviral pills and so on, 90% effective. So we hope that that can roll out as soon as possible. And but it is hope, isn't it? I mean, there's an element of fingers crossed here.
And again, don't take health advice from an economist, but to understand where the economy goes next, I've been looking at that. You know, you mentioned those pills, the antivirals, how beautiful, right? These mRNA vaccines in particular, they can be rejigged if they need to be. We will win this fight. You know. We may not win it quite as fast as today's budget update assumes. But we do know, right, you know, once we get ahead of COVID, and you saw it in those job numbers today, we can do this. It just may not happen quite on the schedule announced today.
On the wages front versus prices, CPI, it's gradually getting there, and gradually, according to the budget forecasts, overwhelming inflation. But it's taking a while.
Yeah, look, it is. And so, again, better news. We are learning how to fight back against COVID. You're seeing a better economy showing up in better jobs and in better wages. It's already happened to some extent. The forecasts are that it continues to happen. But our starting point is from the weakest wage growth that Australia's ever seen. As you note, it's a long grind back again. There is no magic wand. But the evidence thus far is that we can, once we get ahead of COVID, drive unemployment down very fast. That will help longer term, right? You know, to get higher wages in Australia is the same conversation that our politicians have dodged for a long time. That says not just, you know, running on the back of great new technologies, but the reforms and so and we're about to have an election where not many reforms will get discussed.
Well, no, and I spoke to the Treasurer about that, and in terms of what reform is there to deal with the structural expenditure posed by the NDIS, by aged care, the list goes on. The structural spends are there, but the structural reforms, well, they're saying they're going to rely on economic growth. That doesn't...
Yeah, and look, you know, the new technologies are marvellous, right? You know, we've all been using them through COVID, and in fact, you look at those vaccines, that type of technology can do stunning things for us. That's great. But what about the everything else, pushing ourselves harder? The federal-state reform, the cities reform, the competition reform, the tax reform, the spending reform that you're pointing to. They're all really difficult conversations, and I don't see us lining up as a nation to have them ahead of this election.
No, not a few months out from an election. Let's hope that at some point we can get there. The lucky country continues to be lucky. We've seen the iron ore price fall, but that's been picked up by another export, with coking coal.
Yeah, and what's happened both on coking coal and thermal coal, coal to make steel, coal to make people warmer, has helped tide us through. The government, Treasury, continues to be pretty conservative around what happens to next for iron ore prices, for coal prices and so on. We're not quite as conservative, and you certainly wouldn't bet on coal as a long-term bet for the way for the nation to make money. But so far, yes, we had, you know, the lucky country got lucky when the crisis was at its worst. The world gave us a pay rise. That's really unusual in a recession. With China. China gave us a pay rise, initially through iron ore, more recently through coal. They're saying they're not buying us, but that's pushed up the price around the world.
That's a bit of an irony, a lovely irony to finish our discussion today. All the best for the new year and Christmas, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.